Hello, Internet. Welcome back to another episode of Mind Your Own Business, the podcast that tells you a lot of things and shows you a lot of things and basically teaches you how to mind your own business. I'm really excited today to have a guest with me, my first guest on this awesome podcast. I want to welcome Corey Keith. He is the owner of Corkscrew Wine and Cheese in Rockbrook, and I'm going to let him get into a little bit more on the title, but we're going to get started right away. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for being my first guest.
I'm excited.
So basically, the point of this podcast is to talk to you about how you got into business, into the wine business, as opposed to how you're running it. So what I'm trying to do is show people how you can take an idea and turn it into something successful. And you've clearly done that. So why don't you go ahead and just give me a little bit of a brief history about yourself. Are you from Omaha?
Sure. I am an Omaha native. I grew up in Omaha, went to, all the way through high school. College, I went to college in Indiana. And then after that, I spent 5 years post-college in Washington, D.C., or the Northern Virginia metro area, to be exact.
Sure.
And that was a good area to kind of grow up in and learn kind of food and a diverse restaurant scene and a lot of opportunities to like experience things that maybe weren't as popular or available in Omaha during that time.
And when was that?
That was in early 2000, so 2000 to 2005.
All right, sure.
But yeah, high school Omaha native. I spent my 5 years away from Omaha and made a fairly conscious choice to return to the Midwest after living the city life in my younger adult time. So
did you always think you wanted to get back to Omaha, or was it just living in the big city you just decided?
There's trade-offs everywhere. The Northern Virginia was a great town to experience a lot of stuff in. I don't know if it was a good long-term place to raise a family.
Sure.
The economics make child raising cost prohibitive sometimes. Plus, we had a great social network out there, but we had a really strong family support network in the Midwest. So, Midwesterner at heart. It probably was just, I don't know if it was in the cards to be away forever, but I would encourage my kids to maybe move and live in different areas of the country just to have a broader experience in life.
Sure, you have to be careful about that because I kind of encouraged my kids to do that. Now one of them won't come home.
Yeah.
She's a Minnesota, she calls herself Minnesota native.
Yeah.
So anyway, well, let's talk about how you got the idea to get into the wine business, however it morphed into where it is now. But what led you to want to get into that business?
Sure. My background is my degrees in computer science and economics.
Okay.
So out of college, I was doing software development and I was working Library of Congress and I worked for a government contractor for a few years. But once again, I lived in that Northern Virginia, DC metro area. At that time, I wanted to do something entrepreneurial and I wanted to do something food related, and the wine business was kind of the best mashup for me. What I like about the wine industry, it's adjacent to the restaurant business, but it's not a capital R restaurant. Even in my 19, 20 years of doing this, I think restaurateurs are very good at their skill and their craft, but it's probably not the job or the profession or the business I want to run in my long-term life, whereas the wine business has almost all those positive aspects and maybe it minimizes the negative aspects of the restaurant business.
Sure, well, there are plenty.
Yeah. Wine business has what I like about the wine industry is as very much a sense of place. All the products that we sell come from a place. The term that we use is called terroir, but similar to food, like food has a regional nature to it. Like we all eat Italian food and Spanish food, and then even within the United States, there's Kansas City barbecue, there's Southern Creole cuisine, and wine shares that very similar kind of characteristics. And so each, Corkscrew at Rockbrook has 700 wines on the shelf, and each of them have there was a very related story, but each of those bottles has a small story of kind of how it was made and who touched it and how it got to in front of you where you drink today.
So you wanted to get into the wine business, and then Corkscrew has some food involved, but what took you from the wine business to, how did you get the idea for Corkscrew?
Sure. Early ideas. So living like in the Northern Virginia area, and in the early 2000s, the Omaha, I saw a market opportunity. You know, that's in all business. You're probably looking at where can you craft a niche. Back at that time, we had great independent local wine shops, the Omaha Wine Company, the Winery, Spirit World, and then La Bouvette. And so La Bouvette is a shop in town here that's probably most similar to what we do in the sense of having a retail component and a restaurant wine bar component to it also. Back in that time, you know, La Bouvette has a very European kind of focus and feel.
Sure they do.
Whereas Corkscrew probably is focused on the New World and, you know, domestic, you know, we sell all wines from all areas, but we have a domestic focus in our cuisine and our wine selections. And so at that point, in that period of time, and then that remarkably, like what's fascinating about Nebraska is, you know, you can have a alcohol placed business that does retail and on premise under the same roof. You know, in terms of building a business, and as you look at things, regulation is probably one of the most important things you have to deal with, at least in the food business or especially the alcohol business. Many states have very clear and strict regulations on what you can and can't do in terms of alcohol service and retail and you know how much you can serve and such and such. And so Nebraska is very friendly and allows you to do a concept where you have a retail component and a wine bar component. And for us, we look at this, the good and the bad thing about Corkscrew is there's three businesses under one roof. There's a retail business, a wine bar business, and kind of a restaurant business. And those businesses, if we carve them up individually, yes, they may succeed, but what's great about Corkscrew is all three of those businesses combined together kind of build upon each other and reinforce their weaknesses and help make a stronger unit than all of them, the independent. You know, the sum of the parts are greater than the whole. So
you talked about a few businesses that were around when you started, and I believe only one of the businesses you named is still around.
Correct. Or maybe a couple. But yeah, Omaha Wine Company is still around as a pure retail play. And then La Bouvette is an institution in Omaha and probably won't ever go away, hopefully.
So let's talk a little bit about the idea that you had for Corkscrew. Did you originally plan that it was going to be the three pillars that you talked about?
I would say so. It has evolved over time for sure, but we wanted a on-premise, so a place where you can go and consume, and a retail component. And that was probably the biggest characteristic that we started from the beginning.
Okay.
And then over time, it's probably evolved into a wee bit more food and a wee bit more staff and resources devoted to food and the wine bar aspect of it. But generally, the goal from the beginning was a place where retail could benefit from the on-premise, the enjoyment of wine when you're having it at a place. You know, the struggle for a lot of consumers is it's hard. A bottle of wine can be expensive or can be intimidating. And if you go to a wine shop or even the grocery store, you walk down the shelf and you're picking wines based off of label and design and varietal. And a wine bar gives you that great chance to enjoy something by the glass. And then it helps, you know, make people feel more comfortable in decisions about buying bottles for home consumption or gifting and things like that.
So I hope this isn't skipping ahead, because if it is, we'll get back to it. But I know that now you have a sommelier on premise. Somebody's going through the sommelier training. Did you have that? Have you always had that?
I would say so. Sommelier is one of those earn a term, sort of like chef.
Yeah, somebody who really knows their wine.
Yeah, and it's over time, you know, I think it's an earned term, but we do have people that are making conscious efforts to enrich their craft. And there's actually quite a few staff members. We encourage it from a company level just because it gives people a lot of training and a baseline set of knowledge in order to sell products and become maybe familiar with the things that we don't necessarily focus on in terms of maybe import wines and things like that.
Okay.
from the beginning, we're a 20-year business, 19-year business.
Yeah.
People change, and the business has lasted we don't have an original employee, and that's just the nature of business. I'm still around, and original ownership, but I would say we always want people that have a proclivity for an interest in wine. As the business has gotten more competitive, investing in people and skills in terms of certifications and a sommelier kind of title or education is only going to help our business at the end of the day.
Right. And that's another thing, how to bring in resources that are going to help your business grow. I can tell you from my experience when I go in there, I really like it that no matter who is serving me, they're able to tell me about the wines. If I say I'm in the mood for a white, I'm pretty much a white wine drinker or champagne all the time, and they can say, oh, try this, it's great. Or here, try this red. It's got some really great properties or whatever they would say that you might really like. And so it is super helpful. And I'm sure that the people coming in who don't know what wines they want, they love that. So,
and especially in the modern environment that we live in nowadays, it's very easy to shop for things. Remarkably, wine is challenging to shop for on the internet. It has that same frictional difficulties as you're buying based off of score, price, descriptions that you read, whereas the in-person experience does make it so much easier to be comfortable making those purchases.
Oh, for sure. I'm a buy the wine by the label person unless somebody's telling me.
Very much so.
So when did you first come up with the idea that you wanted to open a wine store?
Gosh, I would appreciate your effort to help me have a few moments to pre-think about these questions. I would say, I can look back in my whole life, and in college I took one class called the Entrepreneurial, and it was effectively a business plan writing class. But that class was a fundamental point in my life that maybe opened my mind to the opportunities that you can build and create a business by its component parts. And that class, the nature of writing a business plan, makes you think about each of those pieces that is required to make a successful business at the end of the day.
Right.
So that was probably the earliest that said, okay, entrepreneurship could be an option for me in the future, but that is in 1999 or 1998 in college.
Okay. I have this list.
Yeah.
These are the things that I thought of about the business plan. This list I said is probably, 10% of what you have to think about. And without something like that business plan writing.
Right. And a lot of it's even just the basic format, all right, think about this in this, let's say, okay, marketing. How are you going to market your business? And then for a lot of people that are on their first rodeo is just focus. And some of the questions you're asking right now is, what are you doing? What are you selling? And if you sometimes you think it's easy. You're like, hey, I'm making cookies, but are you really selling cookies sometimes, or what are you selling at the end of the day? And
marketing.
Right. And if you think about that, if you get too product focused and product based businesses, you may miss out on the hard parts or in order to have more success.
True. Absolutely true. So you started thinking about this young in your
I would say so I got married, my wife, in 2003. Life changes were happening at that point. I did feel the pressure or the opportunity, the window of doing something higher risk and entrepreneurial was best fit for me before I had children or before I had many children. And we all live our paths in lives, but we kind of get comfortable where we find some momentum, and entrepreneurship is a risk to your whole family too at the end of the day. And so I thought at that time, it's the chance for me to do something that was more risk taking without, exposing my family to a lot of risk at the end of the day.
So how old were you at that time?
Gosh. Now you're making doing old person math. I would say, so we moved back to Nebraska I was probably 28.
Okay.
So somewhere around that time, but probably thinking about doing, so maybe mid-20s, early to mid-20s generally.
Okay. And you were back here in 2023.
We were
Or
back.
I'm sorry, 2003.
We moved back in 2005. But started thinking about maybe the opportunity of moving back to Nebraska, starting a business, changing from a career in software development to the wine business was the ball started rolling in mid 2003.
Okay, all right.
And now I can do the math as an old man, so it's like 26.
26. Okay.
Yeah,
that's
about that age.
Yeah, that's good that you did that. I remember when I was talking to some gentleman at a happy hour one night, just getting to know each other, and he asked me about my job. I was still in corporate. I was 50, so it was just 10 years ago, a little more. And he said to me, "You are at that age right now, 50 years old. If you want to start your own business, you've got to do that now. It's like monumentally harder the older you get." So good for you.
It is, but and as we all live our lives in our different paths, and entrepreneurship can be the answer to a lot of life's challenges too. When we live in a different time, things are different. Starting a business, I think, is maybe easier in a sense nowadays through the internet and channels to reach people. I would say, especially for you and your podcast here, is we should always think on ways to encourage people to try things.
Sure.
I follow Gary Vaynerchuk. He's a wine guy by heart or by family, and now he's a marketing guy. But people think, at 50 you have nothing left to do, and 50 is just the start for a lot of people at the end of the day. Also,
sure, it was. It just, I think. I don't really know what he was talking about, but I think for me, it helped push me into do what I needed to do, because in 5 more years, I was just going to probably say, okay, I'm just going to stay working in corporate hell.
Kind of sort of that momentum on. And that, like, it's the longer you go, the harder it is to change.
Sure.
And, things that resonate with me too is the Oracle of Omaha. Warren Buffett has made, he was very wealthy at 50, but he's made a large portion of his wealth after 50, and we shouldn't be discouraged by the I'm 47 now, and I've had a great life experience, but there's nothing to say that I can't do anything else different in the next 40 years.
Absolutely true.
And everyone should think of it that way. We all have opportunity, and it's the opportunity we create.
Yeah. Well, you took great advantage. So you were back here in 2005, and you opened Corkscrew in 2005. So,
06 technically, but then again, you kind of think about
sweater's a lie.
And I look at it in the conceptualization was probably 03. We signed a lease, business plan, got debt. Opening the doors is one thing, but that's not the whole. That's not the start of your business.
397.
Yeah, very much so. There's a lot that comes before that, and then again too. I left my job and my corporate job or my government job in 2005. So I look at that as, that's the number that makes sense for me in terms of when we started our business. But, yes, for a lot of retail establishments or any storefront business, you'd think about the day you open your door.
Sure. So when I was in business college, they talked about the 3 things that you really need to run a successful business. You need someone who understands sales and marketing, someone who understands operations, and someone who understands finance. So did you have any partners? Was your wife partnered with you? Did you bring someone else? Or did you have what you felt like was good experience in all 3 of those areas?
I would say early Corkscrew, and once again, Corkscrew has evolved over time, and now we have more people involved and more staff and more expertise in our team. But I would say the early impetus of Corkscrew was me and my wife. And then my wife was an involved partner, but she had she's an educator and she had a job at that point. So at that point, she was a resource to bounce ideas off and be an emotional support and talk through problems and issues and maybe be present at the business in a few points in time. But generally, the early Corkscrew was the day in and the day out was I probably wore most of the 3 of those hats at the end of the day. My degree is in computer science and economics, and so having that economic skill set was one of those things we talk about is college worth it nowadays or not, or where's the value in college, and that curriculum, and that gave me a lot of skills in terms of running my business. And I would probably say sales and marketing and being in front of people and having a more, the nature of businesses is putting yourself out there. That was the hardest part for me early on. And then operations, I look back at it. If I had to do it again, I would probably have worked a part-time job in Washington, D.C., maybe getting a little bit more experience. In my youth, I worked retail. I worked at Menards, mix and paint. And so you got some of those aspects, but it would have been helpful to get a little bit more on the job training maybe in that niche of that business, so I could have a better understanding of processes and procedures that you could apply to the Corkscrew as we went on. So a lot of our internal stuff has been, just grown over time. So systems and processes and procedures, and admittedly, I would say that's probably where I was weak early on too. But the joy was we were small. And we didn't have as many people. Early Corkscrew was, less than one hand of employees, and now Corkscrew across both locations is 30 to 40 people.
Okay. And have you always been the Corkscrew Rockbrook? Has it always been in that location?
Corkscrew Rockbrook, originally started there. That was kind of nice. That was a new building, and we were the first tenant in that bay. I think we were the second tenant in the building. But original location has been there the whole time.
Got it.
We just crossed 19 years in April.
Good for you. So Corkscrew Rockbrook is on the north side of the shopping center.
Yes.
And then your building is on the west end of the little bay you're in.
Correct.
And it's got that great little patio with a fireplace. How often do you get to use that patio? What's the
it's welcome
general
to Nebraska.
Yeah.
When we travel to other markets and visit other wine bars, when you have a longer season, you get a little jealous sometimes when people are enjoying their wine on the patio and in November or February or in these colder seasons for us. I don't know. We tend to pick up, right now the weather in Nebraska has been up and down, but today it's going to be 60 degrees. And some people will make a stab at it sitting outside.
Sure.
I would say generally April is kind of where we start our strength. And then we run into, fall can really be a beautiful time in Nebraska, but you got to fire up the fire pits and have a little bit of warmth out there. So October, but it's all weather dependent.
Sure.
And it's a nice place. Like a lot of people in Omaha, we do have our winters for sure, and so we get a lot of spring fever and a lot of flush once people want to come out and get outside and see.
We're having that winter tomorrow.
Yeah, apparently I thought we were done for snow.
Yeah, too bad. So over time, take me through some of the more vivid things you remember about the steps involved. So, and I'm kind of thinking about for people who are thinking about opening any sort of business, the things that maybe people don't think about, but you had to deal with.
For sure. As I wrote my notes, so I do think about that one class in college, the Entrepreneurial, did give me that fundamental, and a lot of it's just opening your mind to what you can do. So that was probably the first real vivid part of my journey on business. And then I may tie this into the next question, but in order to get from idea to an operating open the door business, things that were pretty vivid in my mind or maybe even challenging. So commercial leases can be really fun and interesting. And that was, I have a great landlord. We have all of our landlord partners are great partners. But Corkscrew is in Rockbrook Village in Omaha, Nebraska. They are a locally owned and locally managed property. So that, we have the eyes and the ears of our decision makers right in the office in the buildings. But as a locally managed and owned institution, I probably had more. At that point, I was a unknown independent operating merchant. If you are come in with a franchise operation, or if you come in with more of a depth of experience, you are less risk for a landlord.
Sure.
But at that point, I was a high risk tenant for those guys. So the vetting process, just the back and forth, to get to a commercial lease is a challenge for a lot of people. And that was one of the things I thought was maybe would be easier, but was more challenging at the end of the day. Once we got going though, we've had, I'm there for 19 years and I've paid a lot of rent, but I do think that they've been great partners over time. So other vivid things I think about, like the volume of choices that you have to make, and it's different for every kind of business, but once again, most people probably simplify their business down into the core parts, and it's not just the craft or the task that's at hand. There's a lot of other things that you have to make a choice about, and it's, even if you probably, for some people, if you think about a parallel choice or a parallel processes of building a house, if you built a custom house, you have to make all those choices.
I remember a friend of mine said when the builders came to her and said, which fan do you want in the bathroom?
Correct.
Which motor?
Right.
She's like, really?
Yeah.
There aren't just things that you just decide? No, ma'am.
Yeah, and there's people that can help you along the way, but it's just there is everything comes down to a choice, and you got to have that mental capacity to weather through that choice process. Corkscrew did open a second location about 10 years ago, and obviously going through that 20 years, 10 years earlier made that process a lot easier. But then again, still there's a set of choices that you have to make. Other things I think about in terms of getting, and I kind of hinted at it earlier, but like regulation. Corkscrew serves alcohol, so we are encumbered by regulation in certain ways in terms of alcohol and service. But then again, almost all businesses have related parts of the government that are there to help us at the end of the day. But you still have to learn how they work and how do you partner with them to have success, and everything from paying sales tax to having employees, all those pieces of the puzzle. How do you get information from those entities at a good point in time where it helps you versus there's been a handful of times in our journey that we got information from government entities too late in the game, and it was very challenging economically to recover from those things. And it would have been so much more helpful to have that information earlier in the process as late in the process.
What do you think you would do differently in that particular realm?
Gosh.
Or what would you say to somebody?
At the end of the day, I would chalk it up to just, it's the cost of having experience and gaining that experience. In the restaurant games especially, there are people out there that are consultants, and they can provide value to you because they've been through it. And I've even thought myself, I'm like, maybe I could help people along as a hustle from what I do now.
Right. Well, welcome to my podcast,
right.
Which is exactly what I'm trying to do.
So you think about those things, and I have 20 years of valuable experience that nowadays I will dole out in small quantities to people, but I'm not going to give away all of that value.
Oh, right.
For free at least, and a lot of it's just because that's what I have, and for me personally nowadays is that experience to speak to those things and to solve those problems quicker. So, yeah, people are welcome to do the research and figure out answer those problems themselves, or hire people to help them along those journeys. If you did go that route of having a consultant or some people that would give you information, just vet them very thoroughly and make sure that they have had success in their past projects that would lead to success in the future projects.
Sure.
There's a lot of people out there that, and I would say it is probably best to hire a restaurant consultant that has lived the business versus someone that hasn't lived the business. It's just the restaurant business is hard and challenging, and it's very easy to apply business-like consulting skills to problems in a restaurant business, but that's not always the right solution.
Sure.
The reality of the restaurant business is a little bit different sometimes. So having that real life experience operating a business will give you the best experience working with a consultant partner of sorts. I would say that it's challenging though, especially as a new business or trying to one of the biggest challenges in starting something new is how do you find the right partners early on? And I've even thought about this from the sales perspective, but we made a choice in our point of sale software, 20 years ago. That was fine. And things have evolved over time, but I've always thought is how do salespeople find the right potential buyers early enough in the process so they can actually make an informed pitch and provide a service to the buyer, to the entrepreneur to say, hey, here are some options for you versus maybe having only the choice that you find. How does sales work and sales and marketing? And it's a struggle sometimes on new businesses because you're new and people don't know about you.
Sure.
So, and I think about that for a lot of decisions but then again, you have to realize the journey on business is you're going to make mistakes and things are going to change and evolve. So you can't live in paralysis by analysis. Like there's always going to be a better solution out there, but the one that you have at hand may be just fine to at least start with too at the end of the day.
I think that your point about the economics major helped a lot. It reminded me of when I went to school. Last week, 2 weeks ago, I did this free online course on AI because I don't really know anything about it. And I just chuckle about the whole, one day computers are going to take over the world. And I laughed and, oh, well, guess what? But that 12-hour course was more about marketing to try to get customers to sign up for their program.
Yeah.
And one of the guys talked for like an hour and a half, I think, on the whole marketing thing. Oh yeah, you can do this. You're strong and have all this, whatever he was doing. I just kept writing on my note, marketing 101, marketing 101, marketing 101. But the reason I knew what he was talking about was because of the education that I took. When people say, college isn't worth it, the broad education definitely does help because you learned so many things with that economics major that have helped you. I remember in my economics class, the very first line of the economics book, you can't have your cake and eat it too.
The irony.
Yeah. So at this point, we're going to take a little break. If you're watching this on YouTube, you see that I'm running this out of order. We've already popped open the champagne and the sparkling wine. We're going to talk a little bit about that. I just want to remind everybody that my guest is Corey Keith from Corkscrew Wine and Cheese in Rockbrook. And on our next episode, we will talk a little bit about what you've brought, and then we will delve back into the challenges that you have faced over time and how the business has grown over time, and just learn more about you and your plans for the future.
Awesome.
Thank you very much for being my guest. This has been very much fun.
Great.